Welcome to our fourth of 10 webinars in our 2025 Women in Leadership Executive Speaker Series, with this one titled Prioritizing Life to Achieve Success at Work. I'm Dr. Susan Madsen, Founding Director of the Utah Women in Leadership Project and also the Karen Haight Huntsman Endowed Professor of Leadership in the John M. Huntsman School at Utah State University. And of course, I'm the host and will be the panel moderator today. This event furthers the mission of the Utah Women in Leadership Project, which is to strengthen the impact of Utah girls and women. And we serve Utah and its residents in three ways. First, producing relevant, trustworthy, and applicable research. Second, creating and gathering valuable resources. And third, convening trainings and events like this that inform, inspire, and ignite growth and change for all Utahns. And I'd like to also thank our sponsors, the John M. Huntsman School of Business and USU Extension. So I want to just jump right in and introduce my panelists today. And so we're going to start with Kacie Malouf. Thanks for joining us today. She is the co-founder of Malouf Companies, the Phase Alliance, and the Malouf Foundation, and co-owner of Downeast. In 2003, Kacie and her husband Sam started one small business that grew into the Malouf Companies, a multifaceted lifestyle company based in Cache County, Utah. In 2016, Kacie and Sam created the Malouf Foundation to confront sexual exploitation, specifically sex trafficking and online abuse. And then in 2024, just recently, she co-founded the Phase Alliance alongside nonprofits Fight the New Drug and the Elizabeth Smart Foundation. And Kacie also enjoys working with a startup mindset and sharing what she's learned on her journey as an entrepreneur. She and Sam were named 2022 Entrepreneurs of the Year by the Mountain West Capital Network. And she lives here in Utah in Cache County with her husband and 5 children. So before we introduce Trina, Kacie, I would love to ask you the first question. I ask all my panelists in this series this question. Just give us, I've read your bio now, just give us a little bit more background about your career path and how you got to where you are now.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me. I'm so excited to be here with everybody today. So like Susan mentioned, in 2003, I had just graduated from Utah State. So I graduated from there, but I didn't have like a real job yet. I was working at Golden Corral as a server, which was not my dream job. And my husband Sam and I had just gotten married. And so we were kind of like setting up our house and purchasing like bedding and things like that and other things for our house too. But we were kind of struck at the time of like how expensive all that was, like just sheets and pillows, like all that kind of stuff in our mind. We were like, oh, this just really shouldn't be that expensive. And so a couple months later, I'm working at Golden Corral trying to find, a job that was more along the lines of like what I'd gone to school for. And my husband was finishing up school, and we were just I really hated working there. And so we were really just kind of trying to be like, how can we make like, I think it was like $2,000 a month or something like that. We had like this goal of like, if we can just make that much, then I can quit my job at Golden Corral or whatever. And so that idea came to our minds of like, I wonder if we could figure out how to sell bedding more expensively or figure out how to do that in a different way. And so we just started researching and spending a lot of time figuring out how can we sell this for less. And that was kind of the beginning of selling things on the internet, the beginning of online sales and all the different ways that there were to do that at that time. And things have changed a lot since then. But yeah, we just kind of started by purchasing small amounts of bed sheets and pillows and things like that and selling them online. And then after maybe 6 months to a year, we decided, well, maybe we can get these for cheaper if we buy them overseas. And so then that kind of started us down this other path of importing bedding. And really from there, it's just been like sort of this evolution over the last 25 years of just starting with sheets and pillows, although now that's probably like less than 2% of the things that we sell. We've moved into, other things in the home category, and we've spent a lot of time kind of refining our supply chain and figuring out how to do all that. And it's been definitely been a wild ride, but that's kind of the beginning. And yeah, we've just grown since then and took on other challenges and yeah, so I don't know.
And then,
We are.
what made you really, and I have a later question about this, but when in this process, did you decide, and I've got that year someplace, to start the Malouf Companies? That's, or the Malouf Foundation, and that's what I know mostly, because they're such a great partner for a bolder way forward.
Yeah. Well, I mean, really, it was maybe 3 or 4 years into us starting our company that we started having like community members reach out and ask if we could donate for this or for that, like bedding, because it really does fulfill like a primary need for people who are displaced or go, having hard times, like they need a place to sleep. And so it wasn't until 2016 that we formally created the Malouf Foundation, but we were giving away product and bedding for a long time before that. And I think just through going through that process, like I used to spend time driving my minivan and like dropping off donations to different, charities throughout Logan and Utah. And I spent some time doing that. And then, through that, just really realizing what a need there was for it and what an issue it was in our community. And then after kind of spending some time sitting in those stories and hearing those things, just realizing, oh, there's actually more we can do rather than we can still give away product and we still do a ton of that, but there are other things that we can do and more that we can do to sort of tackle the issue of sexual violence and sexual abuse. So that's, why we kind of chose that path is just, realizing what an issue it was in our community, how people weren't talking about it, how people weren't really addressing it maybe in the way that we wanted to. And so that was sort of the impetus to create the Malouf Foundation.
Thank you so much. And how interesting that you dived over right after getting through college. And then your husband's still in college. I love that story. Thank you so much. So Trina, so glad you could join us today. Trina Limpert is the CEO of RizeNext Corp, an AI training and business operations company. She's a powerhouse in business development, and I know that. I've known Trina for quite a few years. So as the co-founder of Tech Moms as well, she champions diversity and inclusion in the tech industry, driving impactful change. Her accolades speak volumes, from being named as Utah's 30 Women to Watch list to earn recognition as one of the Utah's business most influential women of 2024. So Trina's pioneering programs have garnered national acclaim, endorsed by great organizations such as Women in IT in New York. And in 2023, she authored, and I've got some questions from your book topic, the Amazon #1 best-selling book, Orchestrating Life, Work, Harmony. And she coaches individuals and businesses on how to prioritize life to achieve success at work. And so she's had a 30-year career in technology, including 10 years at eBay and Oracle. And that's when I met you, Trina, if you remember, when you were working at eBay. And Trina continues to define success and inspire innovation and pave the way for future leaders in the industry. Same question to you. Just I've laid that out. Give us a little more background on your career path and how you got to where you're at right now.
Yeah, again, I'm so excited to be here too, and I love this topic. This is going to be fun today. So, my background, the one question I get asked the most is, how did I end up in tech, right? Especially as a woman, what are you doing there? And so my history, and I speak on this a lot about, really it happened for me after I wrecked my car into a parked car at the age of 18. Just a little fun fact about me. Yes, I did lose my license because I had multiple infractions at the time. And so I was riding my little brother's bike to a fast food restaurant to work called Vittles. And it's now Arctic Circle. It doesn't even exist anymore. But I'm in this place, right, where I'm sliding around on these greasy floors and I'm trying to figure out my life. I'm like out of high school. I don't have money. We grew up in really strict financial, we grew up on welfare and had a lot of financial challenges. And I'm like, I just knew education was my way out. And finally saved up enough of my Vittles dollars to get in back at Utah Valley. It was Utah Community College back then, but
Yeah.
started out in architectural engineering. I just had always loved design and engineering and building motorized cars for my Barbies, right? Which I talk about in the book, that you can love fashion and engineering. But I took a Pascal programming class back then, and it just ignited this whole world that I was like, I think this computer science thing might be something. And I just switched my degree. I didn't think twice about it. I was like, I got a job working graveyards at Hill Air Force Base. So I worked on mainframes overnight in the cold machine rooms, and then went to school during the day and did a computer science degree up at Weber State, and then just continued, got a job at Novell, which led to a job at Oracle, which led to a job at eBay, right? And learned to pivot and shift a lot throughout my career. And as I look back, I went to a lot of the higher education institutions here in Utah. I went to the U, I went to Weber, I went to UVU now, right? And now I work with all of those institutions, except for USU now. We do a little bit. We're getting there, right? But it's fun to see full circle. We've worked with Hill, we've worked with all of these organizations that I got to be part of, and really set me up for an incredible career as both being a mom, being a single mom. I ended up divorced at one point in my life, and trying to figure that out and recognize just the opportunities that are available to women in the tech industry. Tech jobs are mom jobs. I will tout it time and time again. They are the best jobs for moms, just with the remote working and flexibility. And so, when I got to the point where, this last few years, when somebody's like, where's your book? I'm like, what book? I don't have a book, but started to really think about what would I write about? It's really this idea of how do we prioritize our lives first in order to find success and harmony? Because, pardon my French, balance is bullshit. It does not work. Got to orchestrate your life a little bit better and find harmony and seek that. So that's kind of where, I've had my own journey. After I got done writing the book, I realized I actually wrote it for me, not just for everyone else. I'm like, I'm seeking harmony continually, right? I'm like, oh, this is why I wrote it. It was for me, but hopefully it's beneficial to everybody else that's reading it as well.
Well, thank you so much. I've got a couple questions later on for that. So it's good to see so many joining today too. And we'll send an email after with the link and any resources that you two bring up during this. So if you want the audience to have some resources, that is the way. So let's go to my first big question here. And Kacie, I'll start with you. Research, of course, shows that one of the advantages of women-founded organizations and companies is that women tend to create organizations to respond to a community need. And so you both are philanthropists and entrepreneurs. And we prioritize really as women making the world better. So how has the idea of responding to a need been a factor in the organizations you've been part of? And Kacie, you already started talking about that a bit more. Can you continue down that line? And for me personally, you talked about donating to various kinds of organizations. What brought you to the sexual exploitation? I feel like I've asked you about 3 questions, Kacie, so go for it.
I'll start rambling. I'll try to answer. Yeah, I think the whole beginning of our company was responding to a need, right? Where we felt like things were too expensive and we wanted to fix that. At the time, we really just want to make money. That's all we were doing. But it's interesting as you grow as a human and as you evolve and you, I guess, have your needs met and you see that there's can be a bigger purpose for your work in the world. And I think that's really, it's nice to get to that point where after we were making that $2,000 a month, we could kind of look outside of ourselves and say, how can we make, how can we do good with the things that we have? And I think, women are probably maybe particularly good at that just because we're caretaking all the time and thinking of ourselves too. We should be more, but also looking outside of ourselves, I think, just naturally maybe a little bit more than men, but yeah, I think for me, just that those those first interactions of having kind of grown up in a little bit maybe of a sheltered way, I guess, just not realizing that there were so many issues and problems in our society that people just weren't talking about. And so I think just, I don't know, just kind of that idea of like, we had a business that we could use as a vehicle for good, and we've tried to do that over the last 20 years, and not always, haven't done it perfectly always, hasn't always been our 100% focus, but always kind of in the back of our minds, how can we use this for good? And that continues to evolve all the time. But I think I just love how women tend to think about that. And I think that's why, when you ask your question, you say, women are more likely to do that. I think it's just part of who we are, which is so beautiful. And, it's interesting once you kind of find success in what you're doing, you're able to really look outside yourself and be like, how can I help other people through this? And even during the journey, right? Like when we were giving away bedding, like, it's not like we were raking in money. It was just like, we had it and we felt like we should. And so we did. And so I think, I don't know, that's a message I like to share a lot, like that you don't have to have everything to look outside yourself. And just, even if it's in a small way, like donating a little bit of product or having a conversation with someone that helps them or whatever, just being able to like look outside yourself, I think is so important, because it really does make all the hard times in business and in work kind of worth it.
Thank you. And one follow-up. So I still have conversations every day where people say, oh, we have a problem with human trafficking. Oh, we have a problem with child sexual abuse. Oh, I have no clue. So you somehow through your relationships understood that earlier and targeted that quite a long time ago as one of the first groups to do that. Did you just hear stories, or, I mean, that human trafficking is such a niche.
Yeah.
And how did that come up as one of those needs you and your husband wanted to take on?
Yeah, so we were donating, like
Not just in Utah, can I say, but you're really having a national and even some global presence in that area now.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's taken a decade to get there, but I do think that we've kind of are a leader in that space now, just in terms of awareness and helping people become aware of the issue. But I think for us personally, we were donating bedding. We had gone to tour our local Children's Justice Center, which is where children go to be interviewed about their abuse, and kind of it's sort of this merger between like the police and counselors, just sort of kind of a community resource, and most counties have them. So we went and visited ours, and we were thinking like, oh, like we're in Logan, we're so safe here, nothing bad happens here, right? And we showed up there and they told us that I think it was over 380 kids go through there each year and visit the Children's Justice Center for different kinds of abuse. Sometimes it's sexual, sometimes it's physical, or different things like that. And that was just like kind of mind-blowing to us, because those are just the kids that are going. So you think about the kids that are not going and are not receiving those services and that help. And so that was just sort of like mind-blowing to us. And at the time we had little kids, and just thinking about, if it was one of them who were being abused. And so that really kind of drove it home for us. I think just having that personal touch of like, oh, that's our community and that's happening here. And then knowing that's also happening nationwide. Yeah, it pulls at the heartstrings. So maybe like 6 or 7 years ago, we created a training where people can go and learn how to recognize and report the signs of human trafficking around them. So you can go to iamonwatch.org and take that training, but it's really specific to the United States, to how trafficking can look here, because I think people have this misconception that trafficking is being stolen out of being stolen and driven across the border, or I don't know. It's very different from how just when you say human trafficking, how it's perceived as happening. But most of the time, I think over 90% of the time, you're trafficked by someone you know. It's very,
and we have issues.
Yeah, it's very rarely someone you don't know, but it happens in different ways. So the training just goes through and helps you learn how to recognize and report the signs of human trafficking that might be around you. And then, you could be a resource to people who might be going through that, and help them get the help that they need.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And we can definitely, I want to make sure we highlight and put a link to the Children's Justice Centers, because they're a strong partners of ours as well. And they do amazing things.
Amazing and
Amazing,
hard
amazing
work.
things.
Yeah.
Trina, same question over to you. You as well with Tech Moms, really started a nonprofit, just like Kacie. So we have this philanthropic area, right? And being an entrepreneur as well. So, yeah, how is that connected with you and been a factor in the organizations you've been part of, that leaning into that higher purpose, I guess?
Yeah, it comes down to a few things that I took note, but before I go there, I have to say, Kacie, thank you for the work you're doing and support. This last year, we actually had a neighbor, and I live in a pretty affluent area with gated everything and attempted kidnap, and learned a lot more about, this Wasatch Front really is a high trafficking area. It's very real. So, just thank you for what you're doing there. If I think about, what is it that the perspectives of having a, both male, female team and working together and the opportunities there, what I've found it's the same as the tech space is your goal is to solve a problem. And I think that the perspectives that I bring and understanding of issues that aren't seen more generally in a all male team are highly, highly valuable and have been. And there's a couple of things I've had to work through over the years. And I think, one of those is really high emotional intelligence. It's not bragging. It's saying, I've got a higher level of empathy than I've seen in some of my colleagues, put it that way, especially in the tech space.
I like that.
It's very, very real. It doesn't come down to DEI. I've moved very much away from that. I think a lot of, our nation is, and that's fine. I think it really comes down to, if you simplify it, it's really high levels of emotional intelligence, being able to work more broadly with a broader group, right? And a lot of times when I'm working with leaders, I'll ask them, what type of leader do you want to be? Do you want to be a leader that can only work with people that look and act like you, or do you want to work with everyone? Right? And it really does apply to their ego more, right? Of like, oh yeah, what kind of leader do I want to be? And who can I work with and work with well, and what do I need to work on to do that? And I think that's more relevant than focusing just on kind of those trigger words. I won't trigger everybody again by saying them, but I think that's what I found early on in my career is that I did have this higher level of awareness, self-awareness, as well as awareness of others that my colleagues didn't always have. And there was a couple early examples that I found, and even when I was doing my computer science degree, they set us up. I'm the only woman in my classes, right? And they put us in these groups and doing these group projects. And I was a pretty outspoken. I am now. I had kind of lost it and had to find it again. But lost when I was in school because there was so much pushback on me being a female and questioning myself. I kind of introduced the thoughts while I was in college that I didn't have before then, which was interesting. But I started to go, oh, all these guys must have it figured out. They're somehow innately more able to learn the content or something. And we're in this class project and we're doing a group and I see how they're working. And I'm like, why are they doing it that way? That's like really complex. Do they know something I don't know? Do they have something that I don't have? Right? I had this whole inner dialogue. And finally, I kind of just raised my hand and I said, hey, what if we did it this way? And they went, oh, yeah, that is better. Why don't we do it that way? Right.
That's nice. They recognize that.
Yeah. And, once you speak up, you may have it wrong, you may have it right. It doesn't matter, but you need to speak up. And I think that's the biggest thing I see for women in their careers and industry is trust your gut, right? There's something there that you have that's valuable, that needs to be heard. And when you start to have that feeling and like questioning, even if it's posed in a format of a question of like, well, can you explain to me why you're doing it that way? And have you considered this, right? Like put it into a question format. It doesn't quite, come back as like, oh, why would you, suggest that? More often than that, people are open.
Yeah.
I have had a lot of bias and pushback of like, you're too aggressive, Trina, you're too crisp, you're too loud, you're too, what I would say to that is anytime you hear somebody say anything that says too before it,
Huh, huh.
it's a red flag for bias, right? Of if you're too loud, too crisp, too aggressive to any of those things, ignore it because that's for them to deal with and just move forward anyway.
Um,
So I learned that early on in my career to be like, hey, speak up. They can accept it or not, just move forward anyway.
Thank you so much. Now, can you talk a little bit more about the particular, when you started the nonprofit Tech Moms?
Yeah.
So it is like Kacie was talking about how she found her particular niche, her and her husband, with that experience. Obviously, with Tech Moms, it comes right out of what you've been thinking about. But where did that? Yeah, it does meet a particular need. And I'm sure you're such a strategic thinker. I know you are. So talk more about how you found that and the niche that it fills, and maybe just quickly introduce Tech Moms for those that don't know.
Yeah, I'm going to go back 25 years because when I did my computer science degree, I actually wrote my thesis paper on why women should go into computer science.
Oh,
So this was not like, oh, this arrived 2 years ago, 5 years ago. I guess, oh, we've been going for 5
I
years.
know you.
Woohoo! But it was a lifelong journey, right, to get there. And I think sometimes we have these sparks and they come, and there was a lot of experiences that allowed me to do what I do now that if I wouldn't have had, have enabled it. So I was very involved in community outreach. I worked with people helping people. I worked with a lot of different nonprofits throughout those 25 years. It wasn't just up and one day I started a nonprofit, right? I had to build the experience and the skill set and the understanding. I also had leadership experience through my 30 years of, being executives at Oracle and running technology operations at eBay and exposure to a lot of different roles. And it built me as a leader through those experiences. So don't feel like you're going to have it all figured out like day one, right? Like Kacie, it's been many, many decades, right? Of work and getting to that point where you're ready to now the things that you're passionate about, the things you see wrong in the world, the problems you want to solve, you can now go and do, but don't, I had to wait for the right opportunities and timing. And what happened for me and my two co-founders were just, it's one of those things where the universe really does align at the right time and place. So the reason it all of this and solving this gap, right, was identified as when I was at eBay, I was the global president of women in IT, and I was running programs for 1,500 members in 17 countries. And we were putting together leadership programs and other programming to be able to help with, engaging women in the tech space. And one of them that we ran that was really cool, and if anybody ever wants to run it, call me. I'll explain how. We did a coding camp for employees' daughters. And it was really cool because it wasn't just about the girls that we were educating. I then had my colleagues, my male colleagues, coming to me and saying, they didn't say this explicitly, but I knew it wasn't anymore. I don't care about my colleague and what happens to her, but now my daughter. This is going to impact my daughter. It now hit something emotional for them that was like, oh my gosh, my daughter's going to have to deal with this. I've got to be able to focus on enabling them in a career, right? Some of these topics. But the next thing they said is, well, what about my wife? What about my sister? I have a neighbor that really needs a career. She's got to be able to figure out how to get benefits, how to take care of herself. She's a single mom. How do we handle all of these challenges? And at the same time, I actually had literally people knocking on my door saying, Trina, I need to get a new career. I'm not fulfilled in what I'm doing. I want to earn more money. I know that there's opportunity tech. How do I do it? And I'm like, I'm having to hire people off visas because I can't find enough tech talent. But yet we have all this highly educated, highly qualified women that are underutilized here in Utah that need to be put to work, and nobody's doing it. And I'm like, we've got a disconnect between all of these challenges that we have in finding people And then all these individuals saying, hey, let me in. And I'm like, where's the disconnect? And that's really where, I started to put together
Yeah.
this idea for adult non-traditional education career pathing into technology.
I
And
remember when you started
yeah,
it, and of course, Robin Scribner started that with you and another
yeah,
couple of folks, but
Blake, yep,
it has really met a need, and
massive.
I've loved that. Thank you for that. Now I want to kind of get a conversation going with the three of us. Those listening in, if you have questions, I still have plenty of questions on my end, but we always like to work in questions, so feel free. But there was one I want to take a pause from my question. And um, all of us, and women more than men, but men still have it. Someone has asked about overcoming that imposter syndrome. And I'm sure that that comes or came or comes in and out. And Kacie, any comments about overcoming that feeling of imposter syndrome? Because someone in the chat had said that was one of their biggest hurdles. What advice would you give?
Yeah, I saw that comment and my first thought was just like, I mean, there's times even now where I feel like that all the time, right? Like I just do it, but I think the more you just jump in, and I think it's okay to admit that you don't know what you don't know. You know what I mean? Like there's a difference between, I think it's okay for me as a leader. I think it actually is good to say like, I don't know anything about that. Tell me, and then I think being able to be open and vulnerable, I think is really important, and admitting that you don't know what you know and what you don't know. And then I think just when you do know, and when you have an idea or you have something that you're excited about, like speaking to that passionately and having the bravery to speak up, even when there's a lot of times when I've been in rooms full of men and
Yeah.
and I feel nervous, and it's weird to say that because I own the company, right? I should be able to say that, but there are times when it feels harder. And just once you start doing it, it's like anything. Once you start doing it and you start receiving like people thinking, like saying like, that's a good idea, or I think that you're right, or things like that, it helps you want to do that more. And I think one of the things I've also learned is that I think most men want women in the room and in the conversations, and they want like sort of our viewpoints, because like Trina was saying, like we do have a different viewpoint, and it's valuable. And so I think most men see that, and I think they
Please.
want you to be able
Agreed.
to say what you think, and they're accepting of those ideas most of the time. And so I think just practicing it, doing it, and sometimes you
Yes.
sound stupid.
Especially the last 5 or 10 years, I think that's moving forward. But one thing that women don't often recognize is that when you are in a room with men, it is a masculine culture. It is a masculine environment. So when we blame it all on us, why aren't I not more brave? It is a space where you just don't belong when it's like that, and it takes some work and to change that, or for men to change that. I'm going to shift us. I'm looking at time, and it's moving, because I want to really go to the topic of Trina, your book, pieces of that, but also your lives, right? We're doing different things, nonprofits, various roles. And so I actually did a whole dissertation on work life. I did it the opposite. Instead of balance, work-life conflict. So I'm not going to talk about that. But I realized back then that the word balance is actually a tricky word. And I don't personally use that because people think of it has to be equal when it's rarely, and Trina, you led to that. It isn't. It isn't
Doesn't. And it has
equal.
this idea that you're supposed to carry everything, and you can't.
And
Stop.
trying to make sure, and
Yeah.
it's equal. And so I hate the question. I do, like, how do you balance? How do you do
No,
that?
no.
But it's kind of a myth in some ways. But I would love to hear from you, Trina. Get us started on this conversation.
Yeah, it's why I wrote the book, and it really came from watching my students. I mean, we've graduated over 600 women from Tech Moms now, which is incredible.
Oh,
I've seen
wow.
them in the chat, so that's fun to have them all here. And one of the most common themes I saw and why I was like, I need to focus on this. We can do the tech skills, but you've got to get the life skills to go with it, right?
Yeah.
And the first thing that you need to do is put your life first. Because when you get into like an education program or you're trying to grow yourself, if you're putting everybody else's needs ahead of your own, you are never going to be successful. If you don't know what your purpose and vision is in life and you're living everybody else's, guess what? You're not going to find harmony. And so really the idea for the book, and the guideline and methodology I have, and I use the analogy of a garden, of centering yourself in your own life garden. You are at the center, not your kids, not your husband, not your work. You're at the center, right?
Can I just say real quick, we are 49th of 50th on women's preventative healthcare in Utah. We are in the bottom 3 of mammography rates for women over 40. So I'm just throwing that in because what you're saying is
We
take
need
care
to
of your health.
prioritize ourselves.
Take care,
Yes.
put yourself in the middle
Put
so that we
yourself
can be
first.
better. Yeah, keep going. Thanks.
Absolutely. And so there's a few different aspects, and it can get complicated, right? Like our lives are complicated. I'm not going to try and oversimplify it, but I tried to create a model that makes it simpler to identify where you're finding disharmony in your life. And so I have this idea of like everything starts from the fertile soil of mental health and wellness, and really taking care. You start from the inside and you move outward, right? And so we really have to make sure we've got fertile soil. If we're dealing with any kind of mental health, depression, I have a son that had dealt with suicidal ideation. Like there are some really heavy challenges out there, and I know that. But start with your inner dialogue. Going back to imposter syndrome, I'm sorry, but that's not a female's focused issue. Everybody has doubt, right? But the 4 destroyers, if you let them, are fear, doubt, shame, and guilt. Mom guilt being the mother destroyer, right? So you've got to be able to identify, oh, I'm having that doubt. Okay, I'm going to flip it. I'm going to have shame. I'm going to flip it. I'm going to pull the weeds that I call growing up in your garden from that mental health, and you're going to move it forward.
But you have to recognize
You
it. So
have
I'm
to
sure in your
stop
book you
and
talk
recognize,
about that.
oh,
Yeah.
this is just doubt. Okay, what is the opposite of that? Okay, I'm going to think that, right? And all of those things, there's a lot that I go through. We're not going to have time for it all. But then once you get that foundation, you can now focus on your relationships are an area, your financial wellness. We need to talk money. And we're actually going to start a financial wellness part of Tech Mom. So watch for that. Your career. Some women don't have to work for financial means, but they should be working in some way, finding fulfillment, giving back, working in your community, find some form of work because it does create harmony.
And can I just say though, so even if you're working part-time, there is evidence that being able to feel like you can earn money and make at least some money
Safety
actually is linked to being able to leave in domestic violence, all kinds of different things. I know you could keep going on that because you have a whole book. But Kacie, any thoughts about that the myth of balance? And then I want to move you into another question about, you mentioned early on about that, or it was in your bio about the startup mindset. And I'm really interested in how you deal with that in the work-life space. So again, Kacie, I'm giving you like 3 questions at the same time. Sorry about that.
Thanks. I'm fascinated by what you're talking about, Trina. I need to get your book and read it because I do think, I don't know, it's something that there's, especially, I don't know, in my life, there's been times when the balance has been super off, but I think it's okay. In my mind, I'm kind of like, you kind of can have it all, but you can't have it all at the same time. That's just not, like, it's just not possible to do. And so I wholly believe that, like, taking care of yourself, first is so important. And then everything else kind of grows out from there. So I love your focus on that. It's super important. And I wholeheartedly agree. If you feel like you don't have it all and you probably just need to redefine your definition of what having it all means. Because it's not what people think it is. And I love that, just the putting focus on yourself and thinking of your own needs, because actually does benefit your kids and your family so much.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I'll move to that second one I brought up too. So and I'm gonna try and squish the two together. And that is that you've had this startup mindset. And oftentimes that drives you, and Trina, you have this as well, I know, towards starting organizations, starting companies. Do you feel like that has tended to draw you away from that, if we're going to call it balance, or that integration, work-life integration? Or do you think you use some of that in your home too, with your kids, that startup mindset?
I think it's just sort of probably maybe, I don't know, I don't want to say ADHD, but a little bit of that where you get excited about something new and you want to see that through and you want to make that, you want to make that a focus for a certain amount of time. But there's been lots of times where had a new idea, was excited about it, started running with it, and then kind of gave that to someone else.
Oh,
And
I love that.
you run
Yeah.
with that, right? And then
Yeah.
allowing me to focus on other things or at different times, just depending on what's going on in my life. Like I can't, spend so much time over here, but I'm gonna pass it off to someone else and be okay with that. Instead of feeling like you have to own everything really tightly, being able to like let other people lead and run and
That
execute.
takes some work for women to just
Yeah.
let it
Control it
go.
all. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I do think that bleeds over at home too. Like,
Yeah.
just, helping your kids set goals, figuring out what they're excited about. Had lots of situations in the past year that have challenged me with my kids, like having them stop certain activities and want to do different ones. And then they've actually ended up growing and thriving in those other activities. Like just being able to be open to, changing, like in the middle of what you're doing, right? And saying maybe this way would be better. So kind of that mentality of just, and I think Trina, you mentioned this earlier, just like constantly pivoting, like in life, in work, and being okay with it and being like, I'm gonna let that go now. That didn't work out. And
That
that's
takes
okay.
practice.
It
It
does,
does.
and it's like hard mentally. But once you get to the point where you can accept, like, not all ideas are great, not everything works out. And in my personal
This
life,
is this
in
week
my
for
work
5
life.
days is okay.
Yes, exactly.
If,
So
if nobody else is going to do them, they're going to sit there. Like, it doesn't have to be me, right?
It takes all of it,
like
what Trina was
intention.
talking about.
Uh-huh.
You're talking about it takes not being a martyr. It takes being thoughtful and understanding what's happening in your own mind. Trina, I want to come back to kind of jumping back and forth, but you talked about putting up fences to keep the goats out.
Yes.
So tell us more about that. And then I want to go over and pick up a couple questions.
I love the goat analogy. I grew up with goats, so I have some fun goat stories I put in. But I say invite in the gardeners that bloom and keep out the goats that consume. So growing up, we had goats that would like eat my brother's boots, and my mom would be like, keep the gates closed, because if they got into your garden, it was gone, right? So I like this analogy of looking at those that are in your life that might be consuming you, might be consuming your time, your energy, eating everything you have, and it leaves nothing for you, right? When you do that. And it's up to you to be able to set, there's a lot of talk on boundaries. I like fences, protecting your garden, right? Keeping those gates closed and controlling the gates. There's some people that you don't just completely keep out, but you kind of can have to control the gates of, hey, you can come in for a little bit, but here's what if you've got a toxic parent or sibling or friend, something like that, just recognize, they're maybe not healthy all the time, but I can deal with this much of them, right? But it's the same thing at work.
Through the fences. I don't know if you expanded on that. Sometimes you can shut the fence, but still see what's happening.
Oh yeah. And it's the same at work. You'll start to identify, I've done this with a few people where they started to identify people at work that were toxic and that they had to keep out, or maybe they actually had to leave a position. Where I even had this happen where I would wake up physically ill, the idea of going into the office, right? Because it was so toxic. So you have to realize when that's happening and know that you have control. There's a power in knowing that you have control of your life. You are not in a place where you're going to allow anybody else to do that, and taking back that control in your life. And I have a cute little story, just real quick. I was sharing this idea and this model with one of my tech moms, and we were at lunch, and her kids were there, right? And so they heard kind of the story of the invite in the gardeners, the people that help you bloom, that are building you, that are giving you positive feedback, that are reinforcing you. Find more of those people, right? That's why Tech Moms works, is because we build a community of positive uplifters. But she's like, called me, and she's like, the principal at the school called me. He had my son in the office, and he's talking about goats. What is he talking about?
Oh.
And she said he had heard, that like bullies are goats. They're like, he'd had a bully and he called him a goat and was like, I got to keep the bully out of my garden
Oh.
and keep this goat out of my garden. He was talking to the principal about it. It was really cute. But I think I might write a children's book next. But just this idea of like, we need to be able to know that we need to protect our lives and protect what we're trying to grow and develop new skill sets and build our career and find space for ourselves. That's really important. And then keeping out those that would destroy it, right? And
I love that.
when
I
that's
love that, Trina. I really do. I think another thing that I would add, that I was thinking when you were talking, is just sometimes it might not be leaving a position or people that are toxic, but it's like yourself too, like letting
yeah.
yourself let go of like those self-destructive thoughts, or the things that you have in your mind of like, these are the things I need to achieve and these are the things I need to be. And sometimes when you let go of those thoughts and accept new thoughts that help us maintain our sanity better. Like, we don't have to we don't have to meet this goal, but maybe we can meet this goal and that's good enough. And just, I don't know, for me, a lot of it's just mental, like overcoming, and I've gotten a lot better at that maybe the past 5 years, overcoming like the mental hurdles and just saying, I don't have to be on this level. This level's good enough. And
good
that's
right here.
100, yeah. And just, I think
Works for you.
too.
It's shifting expectations for ourselves sometimes, and I have to say for others too, like our own children, right? I've had to shift expectations a lot and then separate, and this took me a number of years, separate what a good mom looks like and what a good mom that other people around me looks like is not what came natural to me. I don't know. Hey, there's some questions over in the chat, and one of them I think is really interesting in light of thinking about this your book title, Orchestrating Life Work Harmony. So we have someone in the chat that said that she was leaving a management position, but once you get into business and different things, you're always told that you need to move up, right? You need to move up in the organization.
Yeah.
And that's beat into us as well as other things. But is there any advice on how to feel that career success without being in management? Trina, you look like you've got
I've got two sides of the coin here, because
Okay.
I see both sides of it, right? So when I was running leadership programs at eBay, this is a big one that would come up all the time of like, I know there's more money. I know that, management's probably a great path for me, but I'm going to opt out of it because, I might have to give up something in my family, and it doesn't work that way. I can tell you right now, when I moved into management roles, I had more flexibility and say in my life than I did in the individual contributor role. So I would say, step back and go, why would I be making that decision to opt out of opportunity? Lean into it, like Sheryl Sandberg says, right? Like there might be opportunity there. Until you do it, you don't know, really.
And it matters what company.
Yeah. And
culture.
so you've got to evaluate that for yourself. I'm not saying it's yes, always go, right? But don't opt out of opportunities because you think it might have an impact on your life. It might be the opposite, right? But I would also say on the comparison is the thief of joy, right? And if you're comparing your version of harmony to somebody else's, it's a destroyer, right? And so you really have to say, what does harmony look like for me? And not look at anybody else. Look at your version of harmony and do not judge anybody else for their choices of what they decided to do.
Good
right.
Point.
You've got to just say, this is what's going to work for me right now. And it's not always a no, it may be not now. I'm not gonna be able to do it right now, but maybe later, or I'm open to that. I'm willing to do that. Let me look at it further. Can you tell me more? Go investigate it, kind of learn a little bit more about it and who you'd be working with and what the demands are and what they're asking for. I just know from my own personal experience, every time I moved up the ladder, the easier it was for me to maintain my life harmony.
It's such an interesting thing. When you said both sides, I was thinking about a different side, actually.
yeah.
And sometimes we as women like to stay in our comfort zones.
Mhm.
So figuring out, is this just me not wanting to be in management because it's more comfortable not? Or is it, another mental, we're talking about mental
Yeah,
things that we need
mental
to
blockers.
jump in. Kacie, did you have any comments about that?
Yeah,
at all?
I was thinking kind of what you said, Susan, like what's the motivation behind that? Like, is
Yeah.
it really because you're happier in an individual contributor role, which is fine. I think there's nothing wrong with that. I think there's such a valuable place for people like that. But if it's because you're afraid or because you don't think you can do it, or there's another reason, then maybe that's what you need to address. But I don't know. I also think that there's been times in my life where I've given up roles or projects because there wasn't anything mentally. I just didn't feel like it was right. And I think sometimes we
And
know
that's
that too.
okay.
Like, yeah, what's the motivation? Addressing the motivation behind it. And if it's just like, no, I don't want to do this right now, or there's a reason, or it just doesn't feel right to me, then that's okay too, you know? You
Yep.
shouldn't feel like you have to be something you don't want to be.
I love that. And I often ask the question, we already know Trina's, what book would you recommend? We're going to put your book in that. Kacie, I know off the top of your head, do you have a book that's really connected with you that you would recommend for people to read?
Oh man, I'm trying to remember. I've been doing a lot of fiction lately, so
That's okay.
I do really love, actually, I do have one. I do really love recently, one of the survivors of, sex trafficking that we worked with wrote a book, and I love her book, and it's called Shadow by Julie Whitehead, and I would recommend that. I think
Oh.
if you're interested in sort of how trafficking could look in our world and in the way that we lived here, and just kind of how abuse can become trafficking. So I love her book.
Thank you for recommend. We like to recommend a mix. So we're at the end, but a quick question for each of you. Well, I'll give you a very quick question and then end with some advice that you have for the rest of us. So my question before that is, what one quick, if you set resolutions or if you just have a goal ahead, maybe it's not a resolution for 2025, anything you'd like to share for yourself or your family? Trina?
I always have goals. That's the one
I
thing
do too.
I think I've always had my whole life is I'm always working on something.
Yeah.
And a goal is only a wish unless you write it down.
Yes, it
So my
is.
husband and I had this discussion the other day. What are your goals? And then sharing it so that we know. I think that's important. The top of my list is always me.
Mm, yeah.
I love fitness. The gym is a non-negotiable. I will make it to the gym at least 6-7 days a week. Like it's
Oh,
required. It helps me with my mental health. It helps me with my work. It helps me be successful in a lot of different ways that I enjoy it, right? And I've learned to treat it.
it's nice that you enjoy that.
Yeah, I turned it into a hobby, right?
Yeah.
Instead of
Yeah.
like, oh, I have to do this. It was like, oh, I get to do this. And I think that shift helps setting goals and achievable things. And there are no bad workouts. So I always say, okay, at least I made it. If I ended up just walking 15 minutes, that's fine instead of an hour and a half or whatever.
Something. It's
But
something.
and so there's always work to do in that space, especially as you age. There's always more work to do. But
And it is linked to mental health. My
yeah.
master's is in exercise physiology, believe it or not. So
It's interesting on mental health. I was thinking this earlier. We've had some of our tech moms referred to our program from their psychologist or counselor because it does having a career and having something you work on and having goals creates more fulfillment and success and can help with some of that mental wellness challenge. So kind of interesting there. But yeah, I think working, I have goals for what I'm doing at RizeNext, and really scaling our AI implementations and workforce development in that space. And then tech moms, we're doing amazing growth. We're looking to expand to St. George this year. We're launching project management classes. We've been doing cybersecurity, data analytics, and AI, just growing our programs. We're actually becoming one of the leader tech skill educators in the
Awesome.
state, which is amazing. And grateful for our partnerships and all of our donors and supporters that are enabling all these. I think we have over 100 women in classes right now. So
Oh, I love it. And we love being partners with both of you. So
incredible.
thank you so much. Kacie, I'm gonna actually switch because I'm looking at time and we're almost at the end and I need a minute right before we finish. And just as you've been thinking about this, I mean, what advice do you have for the rest of us in terms of what you're learning, what you've been thinking of, what's on your mind?
I think of this discussion today, I'm just thinking like, I agree that I think that having a career and having a bigger purpose outside of just being, of being a woman or whatever, just, I think that's really important. So I always encourage people to have that. But I think the other thing that I'm thinking of is just being kind to yourself, knowing your boundaries, taking care of yourself. That was actually going to be my resolution I was going to refer to, was just, taking more time for myself and spending that time on my health, on my mental health, all those things. And I think we as women tend not to do that. So that's probably my biggest thought walking away from this, just that career is important, but then also just taking time for yourself is important too.
I love that. And with the stats that I quoted early, that we have a lot of women who are not necessarily taking care of their health. And we have to think about the airplane and the mask. We really have to put the mask on ourselves and keep that oxygen, keep our bodies feeling good, take care of ourselves, be proactive too, right? And to be able to really care for others and make that contribution that we can in the world. And speaking of that, I just thank you for not just being here, but thank you both for the amazing work you're doing and your visions in terms of your nonprofits.